Hi, everyone. Today on the Writing Gym podcast, we're talking with author Joe Serio. You're going to walk away with specific tips on how to get the nerve to finally finish your novel and make your writing as clear and concise as possible.
Welcome to the Writing Gym podcast. We're here to pump up your writing. And now your host, Andy Brixey, personal trainer at the Writing Gym.
Hi, I'm Andy, personal trainer at the Writing Gym. Welcome to Judo with Joe Serio. I'm excited to introduce you to this week's guest, but first, a word from our sponsor, Laurel Elite Books. Do you have an expert book burning inside you, but you just don't know how to get it onto the page? It takes forever to write a book, right? And what order should the information go in? It's all so overwhelming, right? You're wrong. Laurel Elite Books' exclusive entrepreneur retreat takes you from concept to complete in 8 weeks. They help you to create a book that not only has your name on it, but which you are proud to have your name on. And now, I'd like to introduce you to our resident writing coach, the gal who helps you pump your writing into shape in the Writing Gym. Welcome to the Writing Gym podcast, Annalisa Parent.
Thank you, Andy. I am so glad to be here with you once again.
Listen, everyone, I have a fun little fact about Annalisa this week. Not only is she an amazing writing coach and author, but she is also a fantastic actress with credits from television, independent films, and the stage.
That's true. I was wondering if you were going to mention that that's how we met.
And for all of our listeners, I am 100% sure we have a fantastic photo of the show that Annalisa and I were in when we first met, and we will make sure and put that in the show notes at www.writing-gym.com/nerve. And now, to tell you about our fantastic guest, Dr. Joe Serio is a popular and entertaining trainer and conference keynote speaker on leadership and change, time management and organizational skills, strategies for effective communication, and overcoming barriers to improve performance. He motivates and inspires his audiences while providing thought-provoking information. He's the author of Time Management, 50 Lessons on Finding Time for What's Important, Emotional Intelligence, 50 Lessons on Knowing Who You're Dealing With, Public Speaking, 50 Lessons on Presenting Without Losing Your Cool, and Overcoming Fear, 50 Lessons on Being Bold and Living the Dream. He helps the people in your organization navigate resistance to change so they can move forward successfully. He knows all about fear and change. He spent 10 years in the former Soviet Union investigating the Russian mafia and working with the KGB. He brings his unique insight, wisdom, and experience to your event and teaches your team how to get the nerve to lead and succeed. Thank you so much for joining us today, Joe.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I'm sure that our listeners are curious to hear about how investigating the Russian mafia and working with the KGB can lead you into becoming a motivational speaker and best-selling author. Could you give us just a brief look at how that journey shaped you into the author and the speaker that you are today?
Yes. Thanks for having me. Great to be here. I've been looking forward to this conversation all week. So, you know what? I wanted to be a speaker. I wanted to be a writer when I was 13, 14 years old. I was too afraid. Okay, we talk about fear and all that. I was totally locked down for years and years and years in my life, which is what led me to write about the things that I write about. The Russia thing happened totally by coincidence, if you believe in coincidences. I had to take a class. I had to register for a class in my sophomore year of college. And I opened up the course catalog. This is back in the day, right? This is 1983 when it was on paper. And I shut my eyes and I twirled my finger in the air and I slammed it down on the paper and my finger landed on a class called Who Are the Soviets? And I figured, more than it, well, why not? Why not? Why not take it? So I took the class. It was everything except language. So politics, economics, culture, all that. And I took it and it was really cool. I had no connection to Russia. I have no Russian blood. I have no Russian history. I wasn't one of those kids growing up saying, I must read Tolstoy in the original Russian. No, totally not me, right? So I took the class, and that summer my father said, hey, if you want to have any chance of understanding these people, you should start studying Russian right now. And fortunately, I was too stupid to understand that that was going to be really hard. So I did it. I took the class, and by that time, it was my junior year. I went to summer school between junior and senior year. I stayed for an extra semester, went to summer school between senior year and the extra semester in schools that were, raise your right hand, promise not to speak English for the next 8 weeks kind of boot camps. That's where I learned Russian. So long and short of it, that's how it happened. So I just took a giant detour. To me, in my mind, at this point in my life, Russia was a detour to getting back to what I wanted to be when I was 13 years old.
Wow, I love that. And so now, I mean, that you're not the 13-year-old, but you've achieved so much of what you wanted for yourself. When Andy introduces you and reads that long list of accomplishments, how does that feel for you, Joe?
That's a great question, and it's one that people ask a lot. And here's the thing. Your life inside of you looks different than the way other people see it, right? So, I know that I lived in Russia and slept on lousy beds, and when there are no food on the store shelves, my refrigerator was empty, and I went to bed hungry more times than I care to remember. There's nothing glamorous about that, right? And in terms of getting books written or traveling around the world, it was work. And I mean, was it fun? Yes. But you know what? My wife always laughs at me about this. The fact that there's something in my mind that thinks, well, hasn't everybody done this? Hasn't everybody worked with the KGB? Hasn't everybody run around the world? And so it doesn't feel like anything. It feels like, I'll tell you what, it feels like my life. Like it has finally gotten to the point where I'm very comfortable in my skin, and I feel like I've had the life I wanted to have with a lot of extra goodies on top. But with all the books I'm writing and things that are coming out of the books that I'm writing, this is what I wanted it to be. So it's such a hard question to answer. It's almost impossible because it's just my life. I get up, I do what I do,
Yeah, I love that. And let's talk about your books a little, because you've got this book that you wrote about the KGB. But you've also got this Get the Nerve series, which I really enjoyed reading. These were my two favorites. I like them all, but I feel like there was a lot of good takeaways, especially for writers, in your book on time management and overcoming fear, and also on emotional intelligence, of course. But let's talk about this series, Get the Nerve. So how did you come up with this idea to write this series, and what was that process like for you?
So the Get the Nerve series title came from me remembering friends of mine who said, where do you get the nerve to travel to the Soviet Union? Where do you get the nerve to go there in the 1980s and the 90s when the mafia was all exploding and everything? So the title came from that. I wrote them because I always wanted to write them. I always felt like I had something to say. And the thing that came out of my life, as I mentioned earlier, growing up, was I was locked down in fear. In my head at 15, 16, 17 years old, I wanted to play music, travel around the world, learn foreign languages, be on the cover of a magazine. I wanted to be in the New York Times. I wanted to be on television. I wanted to play in a rock and roll band. I wanted to write books. I wanted to, all that stuff. And there's nothing particularly strange about that for a 15, 16-year-old. But I was so locked down that I didn't do any of them. And at this stage in my life, I've done all that entire list. I've done that list plus more. And so I thought, I have certain observations about my own experience. Maybe it can help somebody else who feels frustrated, locked down, afraid. And that was it. And the process and the format was fairly straightforward. So two simple things. Number one, the format I decided on because of the internet era. In those pages, it's not prose, it's not from top of the page to bottom of the page, there's a lot of white space. And I wanted something that was going to be accessible, easy and quick to read, and just tight, value driven. So we decided, I don't know if you noticed or felt this at all, but what we tried to do in each one of those lessons was edit it like crazy. We edited and tightened up because we had to get the point across in 500 words. So it's like a blog, but it felt more intense than that, So that was, we want them to be motivating and inspiring and something that people can turn back to over and over and over without having to pick up a 250-page book. And so that was kind of it. We brainstormed around formatting and let me say one thing about writing that drove the formatting. So the formatting and the decision how to format was driven by a lot of considerations. One was marketing, one was how do you attract readers and all of that, but one was my interest in writing a lot. I wasn't interested in writing 325-page book. That's what the Russian Mafia book was. I wasn't interested in this project becoming a huge, daunting thing that I procrastinated about. I wanted it to be as easy to write as it is to read. Mm-hmm. That's the reason for the 50 lessons, because I can slam out a draft of a lesson in 15 minutes. And then, write the first draft with your heart, write the second draft with your head, all that idea. So I can slam out a first draft very quickly and then take a lot of time to just tighten. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. And, one of the things that I really want to applaud you on as far as that's concerned is that you're very consistent. I was really impressed as I was reading through this particular series and how consistent you were from chapter to chapter or lesson to lesson, that there wasn't one that kind of went over. Like, it felt very consistent to me as the reader, and that's not an easy thing to do. So whatever you did in that editing process, it was very, very effective.
It was probably the Russian Mafia book that gave me the challenge, the chops to do it, because I wrote and edited that book at least 5 times. So that got, and I've edited a lot, I've written a lot, so I had the practice, but it was that Russian book that really did it. And one thing more I want to say about the series, if you don't mind.
Yes.
So the way the thing was structured would be so that if you picked up one book, you would get the core. And if you picked up all the books, you would get the core repeated. So, for example, I didn't want anybody to miss the core if they only bought and read one of the books. Mm-hmm. So there's a core of material about ourselves and how we function and how we think and how we interact with the world around us. And then I took that core and to some extent or another, made it part of every book. So there's some lessons that appear in every book so that nobody missed those important lessons. Plus, if you read the entire series, that core just keeps getting reinforced and reinforced and reinforced. So they're all designed very, purposefully.
Yeah, and I like that idea of coming at a book design or an overview of a series with a purpose, because that's so important. And it might be something that when we start the writing process, we don't necessarily know, but certainly by the time that we're at the end and we're in the editing process and we're thinking about what this is going to look like as a published process, we absolutely want to know and really do that purposefully to get our message out. So one of the things that you mentioned, Joe, was the revision process and reducing the amount of content. And this is, I'm sure as a coach, you have things that you say over and over again. And one of the things that I say over and over again is less is more, less is more. Like, how can we cut this down and really get to the core, to the essence? Let's create some economy here. in the text. So what advice can you give? Because you did such a great job of really just including what was absolutely necessary and no other fluff, even in your anecdotes, which were very, very concise. So what did you learn, or what advice can you give to writers about how to make their writing concise and economical?
Great question. It's something that comes up over and over and over. I've edited a bunch of books for other people over the years. And so two things. One, the format of these books forced me into being as concise as possible, right? So the lessons are only 2 pages long. It's 2 motivational, inspirational quotes, 500 words, and a takeaway. That's all the space I have. So when you talk about anecdotes and driving a point home, I mean, you're forced into being. So the second thing is this: 2 things about actually writing. The first thing is practice limiting your space. So give yourself 1 page to write the whole thing that's on your mind, and then give yourself 3/4 of a page to retell that same story, and tighten up the real estate that you have available to you to tell your story, right? I mean, that's essentially what I did with the format of the book. It forced me. The other thing is I'm always on the lookout for opportunities to use 1 or 2 words where I may have 4 or 5 words. And it happens a lot. One thing that just comes to mind right now from reading other people's books and mine, or manuscripts and mine, is that it comes up a lot with prepositional phrases. And people are always saying, of the blah, blah. It's like, no. You can cut out all these small little words that aren't helping anything. There are a lot of examples of that. There's, the kind of very big, oh, it was very big. No, it was gigantic, or it was humongous. It was, so we're tightening up the writing. We're making it more powerful and concise at the same time. So that's always in my head, especially in the edit process, revision process.
Excellent. And I love your point there about clarity, because that's something that we emphasize no matter what genre of writers we're working with, is, certainly in nonfiction, in order to get your message across, you absolutely have to have clarity. But it's true in fiction as well. Nobody wants to read a piece that meanders all over the place. I mean, Tolstoy got away with it, but that was a different time period. And, the purpose of literature was quite different then. And you mentioned the internet age, right? So we don't have time. We want that message. We want to get it out. We don't need 3 pages about what a tree looks like. We're not going to do that anymore. Yeah, so that's a really good point. Now, here's an impossible question to ask or to answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you have a favorite book of the books that you've written?
Do I have a favorite? I do for various reasons, right? The time management one is my favorite because everyone says it's the best one.
It's really good.
The fear one I like a lot because it's the foundation.
Yeah.
And everything else derives from that. By the way, something popped in my mind a minute ago. I want to make sure I don't forget. And this may be important for writers to kind of get, right? So one huge lesson I learned, I took the bestseller blueprint class from Jack Canfield. Okay, and one thing he said about preparing Chicken Soup for the Soul books was that he gave it to about 40 readers with an extensive survey of questions to answer about where do they feel bored, where were they inspired, all that stuff. And I remember that, and that was 3, 4, 5 years ago. And I remember that when I did this series. So the time management book, the fear book, the public speaking book, 3 or 4 of them went out to 25 people. And I asked them very specific questions because I didn't want anyone to come back and say, yeah, it was good, I liked it, because that's totally useless. But I gave them parameters, and I gave them a manuscript, and I gave them at least a month to read it. And they came back with so much great feedback. Sometimes a book got totally restructured. Sometimes I had to tighten up even more. Sometimes they didn't like, whatever, this lesson didn't flow exactly right. So it's kind of one of those things where, hey, if you like it and it seems consistent and it flows well, guess what? That wasn't an accident, right? And so you think about, I've got to send my manuscript out to people outside of my body because I'm way too close to the content, right? We did that. That was a huge part of our process. But favorite book, no, not so much. Here's my task. The Russian Mafia book was the first book I wrote. The publisher didn't change a single word of it.
Wow.
So they published it exactly how I wrote it. And my task with the Russian Mafia book was I wanted to write the book that I had in my head. And I wanted it to come out the way I was imagining it. And you know how difficult that is to get, you have a thought, and then by the time it hits the paper or the computer, it's a different thought. And it spins off in places you weren't anticipating or whatever. But the Russian Mafia book was the thing that I wanted to birth, right? That's the thing I wanted to. The Get the Nerve series is the series that I wanted to write, right? So I want to be satisfied from myself that the standard, the quality is high enough. I don't worry about perfection anymore because I used to, right? I used to be procrastinator, perfectionist, kid myself that I have writer's block constantly and all these reasons not to sit down and write. But I wanted them to be, to reach a certain quality. I wanted them to be actionable and accessible. That was the biggest thing. And I wanted them to speak about what's going on in my head and my life. Because here's how I look at books. We can market it, and let's market it. Let's make some money. Let's, have some successes in that sense. But I'm 53 years old. And I know that when I go, these books are going to be left behind. And that's my overarching mission. I want to get out everything that's in my head from my life and express it in one shape, form, or another, and have that be the result, right? The writing, the books. So it's kind of, I don't even want to call it legacy or mortality or whatever, but that figures largely into what I write about and why I'm writing the things I'm writing.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense to me. Andy spoke at the beginning about Laurel Elite Books, where I'm the senior editor, and we help nonfiction writers to write their books. So if you were standing in front of our group of authors, what would you tell them? Like, here's how to have a successful book. What advice would you give?
First, sit down and write, because I know half of you people out there in the audience aren't doing as much as you should. But the biggest question for me, and this is a question I ask people all the time when they tell me about writing and all that, I want to know why. I want to know why. I want to know, is this to leave a legacy for your grandchildren? Is it in order for you to see your name on the spine in a library? Is it to make $1 million? Is it to influence people? I want to know why they're writing. And a lot of times they don't know. And to me, the why generates a lot of information for the format and the process and all the things that are going to come after that. I want to know why, because it's going to influence all kinds of stuff that we do. So I think, kind of to echo Simon Sinek, I said, know your why. Know your why. Why are you in this game? Because we know the stats. We know that, number one, it's hard. Number two, almost nobody's going to have a, financial commercial success in a bestseller sense. And, oh my God, I just bought a $2 million house off my book sale. Like, that's not going to happen to most. You know what I mean? Except people go into it with this idea that, it's exactly the way I did with the Russian Mafia book. Okay, I'm going to write this, and the day it comes out, people are going to be clamoring and stomping on each other to get past each other into Barnes & Noble and buy copies, and I'll be flowing and money, and the phone will be ringing. And none of that stuff happens. It just doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that at all, which is what spurred me to write like a maniac and create this series and just do it.
Just to do it. I like that. That should be like somebody's slogan or something.
Right? I mean, it just says it all. Somebody should have picked it up by now.
So, Joe, what would be your advice to somebody who does say, when you ask, why do you want to write this book? And they say, oh, because I want to make all this money, or because of this. Like, you just straight up say, well, then you choosing the wrong thing.
No. Oh, no. So, because the thing that I don't want to do, I don't want to totally shoot them down and discourage them from doing anything. But we have to have a conversation about process. And I don't mean writing process. I mean more like marketing process. And I want to know how dedicated they are. I want to know what their daily schedule looks like. I want to know how many jobs they're working. I want to know how many kids they have, because they're going to say, I want to write the bestseller, and they're not going to have time in the day to do it. Right? The big lesson to me was John Grisham and Scott Turow and Toni Morrison and Maya Angelou, and they all tell their stories about how they wrote. John Grisham got up and went in 5 o'clock in the morning, went to the laundry room and wrote on the ironing board and the wash and dryer while the rest of the family was sleeping. Right, Toni Morrison and Maya Angelou were writing their manuscripts when they had a baby on their shoulder, throwing up down their back, and orange juice spilling across the manuscript, and just all this stuff. I want to know if the person writing is going to, put in the time. Are they going to put in the sweat equity? Are they going to do the research about how to market a book of their sort before they come, and say, okay, here's a manuscript. So yeah, but marketing starts at the beginning. It doesn't start at the end, right? The process of thinking about marketing, the process of doing marketing doesn't happen when your manuscript or your book is published and comes out. And most people that I've met just don't know that at all. So no, we need to have a conversation that kind of, gets them thinking a little differently, a little more realistically, not to defeat them, but to say, hey, how can we increase your chances of getting what you want? Because the other thing is, you know what? If you shoot for the stars and you land on the moon, you wanted to make $1 million and you only made 500,000, you're ahead of 99.9% of all the other writers.
There you go. Yeah, and I mean, when we think back to the why, I mean, certainly there's a financial interest, especially for people who are writing expert books or, your expert series. But there's also the incentive of getting your message out into the world. And you were talking a little bit about leaving a legacy, and it's related to that. You have the power to influence someone with your words, with your message, with your experience in a way that can help them get out of a difficult situation or just to better their lives in some way.
You know what the most fun of it all is after the book is done and it's out and it's in the world is because of the way I work. I speak, I train. I have a 10-month leadership academy that all of these books are part of. I get emails a month later, 6 months later, a year later, with all these people telling me how they changed their lives. That's the deal, right? Because if you do it for the money, you're going to be disappointed, if not insane and crazy and divorced and all this other stuff, right? But if you do it for the money and you're holding on to that as the necessary goal, it's not really, to me, that's not the reason to do it. Like you said, you have a message or a story, a novel, fiction, nonfiction, whatever, that you have to get out of you because that thing that sticks in my head also, I think was Benjamin Disraeli or somebody like that, who said, the worst thing I could possibly hear is someone who dies with their music still inside them. That to me is a reason to write a book, because it is not easy. And if you're looking for a quick, easy thing and a payoff and all that, forget it, man. Everybody's out there doing that. So how are you going to do it maybe differently? Or are you going to write from your heart and soul? And are you going to be okay if you don't make any money off of it?
Excellent. Point. I mean, even J.K. Rowling, who's made cajillions of dollars at this point, before she was J.K. Rowling, she was living in a car. So, I mean, you have very little chance of becoming the next J.K. Rowling, the next Stephen King, whatever. But all of those people did what they did when they wrote their books because of passion, because of love, because they were following what was important to them.
Yeah, and you just reminded me of another point. When I was growing up, I wanted to be Eric Clapton. And it took me a long time to figure out that job was already taken. Right? There's already Stephen King, there's already J.K. Rowling, so the only choice we have left is to dig inside and bring out our thing. That's the reason I wrote the Get the Nerve series. That's the reason for that series of books.
I love that idea.
So, Joe, just wrapping it up here, we have one question that we ask every single person that comes on the podcast, and you've already given some fantastic advice, but if you could narrow it down to one big important piece of advice that you would give to aspiring authors, what would that be?
So besides the pedestrian cliches of, just do it or write or, get over your procrastination or whatever, what I learned what I learned in my reality from myself and my situation is that if you sit down and write, and you write from the heart and soul, and you write what really needs to be written, and if you're looking to market it and it's part of your business and all of these kinds of things, and you really work that part of it as much or more than you work the book part of it, things are going to happen that you cannot guess at or imagine right now. And they may be small, they may be huge, they may be the day you get an email from somebody whose life you changed. It may be the day, like for me, 3 weeks ago when I got a phone call from a Hollywood producer who read my Russian Mafia book and wants to make a movie. It's totally mind-blowing that things will happen that you do not anticipate. Big, small, whatever. The Hollywood thing is insane, and I don't take it too seriously because that's a ridiculous road. But don't go looking for that huge. Just keep your eyes open and look for the things, the blessings, the enrichment that your book is going to bring not only to your readers, but to yourself in ways that you can't imagine right now.
Wow, I feel that inspiration. Thank you so much for that. That's really wonderful.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. That's something that we haven't had anyone share with us yet. So that's great. I have so many notes. I'm so excited to share with everybody. Speaking of notes, thank you so much for joining us, Joe. And we will put the links to Joe's website, where to purchase his books, and everything else that you need to know in our show notes at www.writing-gym.com/nerve. Thank you so much today for joining us, Joe. I really appreciate all this fantastic advice that you've given us.
Oh, thank you. It was a blast. I had fun. I'm so sorry it's so short.
And thank you, Annalisa, for more of your great writing advice. Annalisa is the resident writing coach in the Writing Gym. She helps writers start, finish, and bring to publication writing in all genres, and in my opinion, is pretty much the best at her job. You know, you could publish your expert book if you only knew how. Joe has given us some great tips today, writers, but there's even more available to you thanks to our sponsor, Laurel Elite Books. Laurel Elite Books' exclusive entrepreneur retreats take you from concept to complete in 8 weeks. 8 weeks to a completed manuscript. They help you to create a book that not only has your name on it, but which you are truly proud to have your name on. Please check them out, and we will have more information on that in our show notes. Thank you all so much for joining us to pump up your writing here on the Writing Gym podcast. Happy writing!
This has been the Writing Gym podcast with Andy Brixey and Annalisa Parent. To join the Writing Gym, visit www.writing-gym.com.